we have some questions, and I want to just have a conversation with you, but I'm also supposed to ask you these various questions.
Sure, yeah, no problem.
Yeah. The first one is talking about combining psychodynamic technique and attachment theory. And again, I've had a little bit of experience with that, but I'd love to hear you talk about it.
Sure. It's a wonderful question. And, I think that part of my interest in combining attachment theory with psychodynamic, particularly modern analytic technique, but not just modern analytic technique, part of it goes back to my experience as an academic doing developmental research and feeling like in psychoanalysis, so much of the developmental theory is sort of like what someone had a good idea about. And then some people started to look at babies like Margaret Mahler and a few other people. They thought, well, Freud had a bunch of good ideas and he had kids, but he never really examined in a systematic way how development works. He just had a lot of ideas, and some of them were brilliant and some of them not so much. And so there was something about my early training as a researcher that has always had me interested in development that's observable, as it is in attachment theory, combined with the sensitivity to and the elaboration of our intrapsychic lives, which is psychoanalysis's great strength. And so I've always been excited about the combination of the two for that reason. I also think that when we make interventions in groups or with individuals, I think it is never going to harm us to keep developmental principles in mind, since what we're really trying to do is help people grow and change, understanding the most important principles of our early development, which is still embedded in our brains and embedded in our minds. I think it's just critically important.
Yeah, that those early times in our lives are so fundamental to who we become later on. Yeah.
Right, when those neurons are tying together, that social emotional environment becomes a part of us, whether we want it to or not.
Yes, yeah, so whether we want it to or not. You focus on the development of a secure base in group therapy. What therapeutic tools do you think helps this development?
Well, I think in terms of therapeutic tools, virtually anything from any theoretical orientation can be helpful in terms of cultivating a secure base atmosphere in the group as a whole, among members, and also with the group leader. But there are 4 basic components that are critical in secure base functioning. So back early in his career, Peter Fonagy asked the question, we know from earlier research that the parental attachment figure helps the child regulate emotion. That was well established by the time he started doing his research. He asked the question, what was it about the attachment figure that was so useful in helping the child regulate their emotional lives? And developmental research came up with 4 broad categories. So any intervention that includes one or more of these categories is by definition facilitating a secure base experience. And just quickly, the categories are some form of mirroring, emotional mirroring, something called anaclitic attunement, which just means you're helping the other person have a feeling or experience they can't generate for themselves, another person's required to have the experience. The third is behavioral structure, having things be predictable and structured, like the frame in group therapy or individual therapy. That's a form of behavioral structure. And the fourth is play, the use of symbolic play and fantasy, like Winnicott talked about, the cultivation of transitional experience. Any intervention from any orientation that includes one or more of those components would, within attachment theory, be considered a way of cultivating secure base experience.
I love that. And the idea of earned secure attachment. I love what you're saying. But can you give me some examples of some kinds of attachment problems that you see and how they might show up in group?
Well, fortunately for us, since we have college educations to pay for and mortgages, there's no shortage of attachment problems that show up in group. individual, which is really good because I'm in the midst of thinking about taking my kid back for a second year of college next week and coming on vacation. So I'm
It's
thinking
that time
about,
of year.
yeah, exactly. I'm thinking about all the attachment problems I face in my practice tomorrow morning. It's useful, I think, to think about insecure attachment as having two basic dimensions to it. There are these different categories that are talked about, and I'll talk about that some during the workshop. But the two basic dimensions that you can use to classify all insecure attachment involve anxiety and avoidance. Those two dimensions are what's used in this day and age as by attachment researchers to classify people in a more sensitive way than just sticking people in categories. And so if you think about your practice, or if I think about my practice, virtually every patient can be evaluated along these two continuums. People who are highly, at some point of low to high anxiety around feelings and emotional contact, and people who are avoidant of their feelings and emotional contact, to people who are very receptive. And those two dimensions can classify almost anybody that we're working with. So when I think about attachment problems, I'm working on a paper right now where I have a particular patient in mind. I'm thinking about a guy who was profoundly neglected in his development. His parents had a family business that required virtually like 80 to 100 hours a week. So he raised his younger sister, was profoundly neglected, very bright, is an engineer, but really came to believe that his neglect by his parents at some deep level was his fault. And so was quite self-hating. And anxious and passive aggressive with other people, expresses his anxiety and his anger through withdrawal. And in the paper that I'm writing, I'm examining how modern analytic techniques have been as successful in helping him be able to verbalize some of this toxic emotional experience in a way that, instead of acting it out, in a way that starts to look like secure attachment, even though the material, the content that we're talking about is so painful and difficult. But if you think about secure attachment, at its core, it's the ability of two people to help the person in distress. I guess it could be both people in distress, really, in a marriage.
Self-regulate.
Right.
Co-regulate, yeah.
Yeah, regulate that distress. And that can happen at the butcher shop with someone you don't know very well, or with your own child, or with your parent or your partner. And so his capacity to be able to verbalize rather than internalize his distress has been a powerful experience to be a part of. He's somebody who comes to mind. But I can think of virtually anybody in my practice as having some kind of attachment challenge. Even some of the healthier people I work with, and I work with a lot of high-functioning people, they have pockets of insecure attachment in a particular domain, like sexuality or grief or anger. Whereas in other aspects of their personality, they might function at a higher level than I do. They'll have these pockets of internal conflict where attachment difficulties become evident.
You said, you just led right into the next question, because you said they may be higher functioning than I am in some of these characteristics. And of course, we always bring ourselves into group as the therapist.
Absolutely.
So how do you see your own, or if not yours, whoever the group leader is, how do you see their attachment style as playing out, or as important or intersecting?
That's a wonderful question. I think that has a lot to do with the developmental phase of the group. So in the beginning, I think that the therapist's attachment style is particularly influential. There's a lot of narcissistic transference that's operating because people don't know each other very well. So they're using their own experience to try to know other people, which is, in a way, the definition of narcissistic transference. And so the therapist's attachment orientation tends to be mirrored by the group, because there's such an intense desire to be accepted and belong in the early stages of a group, say in the first year or so, that I think that the therapist attachment style tends to be pretty profoundly mirrored by the group naturally, which isn't necessarily a problem as long because you have to be who you are. There's no, as we both know, there's no hiding in a group. The problem comes when we let ourselves get too comfortable with that, because the group can, or in the early stages, start to mirror the aspects of our own personality that we're really comfortable with, that we're centered about, and it's only a problem if you let yourself forget that.
Forget that we're only playing in your safe areas.
Right, exactly. So I can be. I have a tendency, my personality, there's nothing I can do about it, to be a little tilted towards warmth and acceptance, and especially in groups, I have to contain all the time. I really love my groups, and I really love the people in them, but I've really got to contain that. It's okay to have warmth in the beginning because it helps to make people feel safe, but it can really constrict aggression and conflict and more difficult feelings and things that are maybe deeper and more complicated than just being loving and accepting. And so, I have to really keep that in mind and monitor that and find ways to play with and have fun with other parts of the experience and other parts of myself that I might not be as naturally attuned to or as comfortable with.
Is that difficult for you?
It can be. It can, especially if I have a group, like I have one group that's been meeting for almost 10 years. And I don't know how I've done this, but I've arranged to have this group. They're lovely. They're really smart, but they are so cut off from their feelings. And I think I unconsciously turned it into a dumping ground for like the patients I have, who are very likable. They're all sweet. They're kind. They're polite. But there's no passion in this group. And it is the hardest group for me to stay emotionally present in. I would take any kind of
unspoken.
So much unspoken and so much left on the table, not talked about. But somehow I've managed to make, out of the groups I run, this group is, of course it's on a Monday. Maybe this is the way I punish myself.
It's a Monday group.
But I do think, I think when you have multiple groups, it's really easy as a group therapist to unconsciously create groups with certain personalities without even knowing that you're doing it. And I certainly
selecting group members that according to certain personality characteristics too.
Right. Like I have two very high conflict, very passionate, intense groups, and I can see how I've thought, well, this person's probably too inhibited or too shy to be in this group, so I'll just put them in the Monday group. People like this. So, I think we're always influencing the process, and certainly our attachment style does.
Yeah. Oh, well, I appreciate you being vulnerable yourself and sharing that. Let's see, we were talking about, you have mentioned in some of your work and in previous conversations about mentalization. And you've talked about that in terms of an achievement of secure attachment. Right. You said a few minutes ago you used the example of your client, but I wonder if you could elaborate on that.
Yes, say a little bit more about, do you want me to just talk about how mentalization is an outcome of secure attachment?
Yes.
I guess the best way to think about this is that if you think about mentalization, which is basically the ability to think about and engage intentional psychological states in ourselves and other people, needs, goals, motivations, why people do what they do, why we do what we do. I think it's fair to say that you can just think of mentalization as being psychologically minded, really. It's a kind of fancy word, but really it means psychological mindedness, knowing that people have separate minds, knowing that feelings are temporary and can change, a kind of basic psychological mindedness, which really isn't so basic when you think about what goes into creating it.
Yeah, it's kind of the ability to observe our own experience.
Exactly. And so one of the things Peter Fonagy and his colleagues have demonstrated so beautifully is that in securely attached relationships, when the child's basic maturational needs are met, it reduces a certain kind of tension within the mind that lets other things become more interesting, like the child exploring the parent's mind, getting to know why is my mom doing that? You know, you can't ask a question like that if you're cold and hungry, or if you're crying and not being attended to, right? Those primary developmental needs are so overwhelming for children. If they're not met, there's no higher level thinking and
You're
feeling.
trapped in the experience, in the experiential part of your mind.
Yeah, you become embedded in the concrete, literal experience that you're having, and it's only through having those needs responded to. And modern psychoanalysis says something very similar, actually. Spotnitz talked about the critical way that the parent meets the child's needs so that other experiences can emerge and develop. Otherwise, you're trapped in your primitive deprivations, which is what modern psychoanalysis is very focused on. But attachment theory is very similar. Attachment theory talks more about the emotional dysregulation that happens in the development of the central nervous system and representations of self and other a little bit more explicitly. But the idea with mentalization is that you know what you're feeling, you know why you're feeling it, and you know what you want and where your feelings reside in your body. If you can answer all those questions, you're mentalizing at a pretty high level. But as we both know, when people get really upset, mentalization breaks down, and it breaks down into its primary components. And that's what we as clinicians need to be aware of and sensitive to, because our intervention should be shaped to match the developmental functioning of the patient in any given moment.
Yeah, you've had some had some conversation about that. We've had some conversation about that on other occasions, and the idea of meeting the clients where they are developmentally is really important. That's a thing that I've learned from you.
I'm so glad to know that.
Yeah, and I look forward to you talking more about that when you come. So at the conference, you know, you haven't been with us for our fall conference yet, but we have a variety of different experiences for folks there. Of course, you'll be talking to us and giving us information in a didactic way, and people will enjoy learning from you. But also, we're asking you to do a demo group, and so we get to watch you actually work with the things that you've described to us. And then the participants will break out into small groups and have their own experiential group learning. And so I wondered if you could talk a little bit about the idea of experiential learning. I know you do training groups.
Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about experiential learning and why you feel like that's important?
Well, I think, you know, as I think about that, I'm reflecting on my own experience. And, you know, I have a PhD and I did all this research and I've written papers and done all kinds of things. But the development that stayed with me the most has been when I've had an emotional experience and then I've learned something from it instead of trying to do it the other way around. So I'm a huge, huge proponent of experiential learning because I think you just develop faster that way. You know, you can read books and be educated, and we all should be. We should all know things for sure. But being able to translate that into procedure, into knowledge that's usable emotionally and relationally, I think the only way to do that is to have the experiences first and figure out what they were second.
To put the learning on top of it, of the experience.
Yeah. Which is kind of how the brain is structured anyway. You know, we have, you know, if you think about the limbic system being a more primitive brain structure than the cortex, when we have our emotional experience first, and then we can develop ideas about it, there's a funny way in which those ideas become seated within us in a way that's, I think, quite unshakable as compared to trying to do it the other way around. So I think it sounds like a very exciting structure that you have for your workshop, and it's unlike any workshop that I've participated in or presented at before. So I'm really excited to see what it's like. Sounds very multidimensional.
Well, it is, and an important part of that is going to be having you join us. So I think we've given people a taste of what they can expect from you, and also an introduction to who you are. And I personally am really looking forward to you coming to Austin.
Well, I'm really excited about it too, and I think this conversation is a wonderful lead-in to helping me think more about what to present and how to present it, which I really value as well.
Good. Okay, well, we look forward to seeing you in November.
Okay, take care, David.
Bye, Aaron.
Bye-bye.